stop overthinking. Can I go and play pickleball this weekend? Like, just
let's be explicit. What's the second door there? The second door is you coming back.
Just coming back home. I'm buying a burrito. You know what I mean? I'm happy. You know, it's completely fine.
You know, I want to walk through this example because it kills me. This is definitely happened.
I didn't exercise. I bought a burrito on the way home.
But this is literally happens like where you have like a tweak in your back or like a hamstring. You're like, I'm gonna go for a run. Yeah, and then you get down like 50 meters
and you're like,
you know what? I'm calling it.
Pizza.
And on the way back, you literally pass a 7-Eleven. You're like, screw it. Like, I'm getting to this.
Let's lean in. Yeah. Welcome to another episode of Not Investment Advice. You got Trung fan Bilal Zaidi here. AMA episode. Lots of people's favorite episodes. These lots of random stuff to discuss.
We got a lot of backlog because we keep asking and then we backlog them. But like
and we'll say if you're in the Telegram group, there's a link in the description. That's where we normally ask people. Maybe in the future we can try posting on YouTube. You know, you can put the little comment thing. We could do that one day on Spotify as well. But let's get straight into this. Your boy Adam Singer on X, friend of the pod. Do you want to just read out his tweet here, or how do you want to do this?
So Adam found this Reddit post, and his tweet, which at this point was 8 days ago, he found a Reddit post from August, and this thing went nuclear on X. So the Reddit post title is "What the F is wrong with our parents?" And the story that's being told here is there's a young millennial family, and they're struggling. I think a lot of very relatable, struggling with debt. They have children, they have good jobs, but just like the 2024 economy is just not as, how do you put it? It's not as flexible as it was in the 1990s where you could literally just buy a home, see increase in value 10x, or in the 1980s, same deal, right? It's like, I think a lot of people understand the struggles. Like you think you're making good money, then you start paying for daycare, start paying down your student loan, living day to day, and you're finding there's just nothing left to buy a home. This is a very relatable thing. Now, I do want to add something because we talked about it before the podcast, but it's like the idea that millennials are behind boomers and Gen X relative to their age and wealth. Weirdly, that number's actually changed. In the past 2 years, if you look at it, is like millennials are actually on par or ahead. But I think the story resonates though because the economy is just not what the way it was set up, right? It's like, dude, you could... Remember the corporate jobs and the shit you could get away with in the 80s, 70s, and 80s? But it's just like these pipelines of overeducated people now going after limited positions, right? So I give that a setup because this guy in this Reddit post is basically complaining that he saw his father-in-law's investment fund. He saw that his father-in-law had 10 million in the bank. Then he went to tell his own father, and so he tells his father, "Hey, listen, father-in-law guy here has got 10 mil." His own father goes, "Oh, this guy's barely beating me." Just like the whole point. There's 20 mil.
Casual way to drop that
between the two fathers. Yeah, exactly. There's 20 mils between the two fathers, and this family is struggling to pay down student loans and with daycare, right? So Adam, friend of the pod, writes this tweet, and he goes, "Have friends like this, parents worth closer to 20 mil. They live alone in giant homes in Florida, angry at the world most of the time. Kids are responsible and work hard. They're not rich. It's a truly strange phenomenon. Why aren't you leveling up your kids?" So that's the question here.
And just to expand that out, Trung, because obviously his example, I do think sometimes on Twitter, we're kind of in a little bubble of lots of rich friends, essentially. Beyond the 20 million parents. The idea is, for most people, it used to be, you work really hard so your kids can have more than you and they get better opportunities, they get better jobs, earn more money, etc., and they live a better life. And now in our generation, it hasn't necessarily worked out like that, where even, let's say my example, I earn more money than my family did, but I would still probably have less money overall because of the way the
home equity invested in funds rode this 40-year bull wave of equities, asset prices, right?
And then the last point to that is, you kind of mentioned there, but just the biggest one on housing is just the multiple of your income, salary, average salaries versus median house prices. That is, record levels or whatever.
Well, let's give an example. In Vancouver, I believe it's around 15 to 20 times. So I think the average salary here is, call it 70,000 a year. So the pay here is not very high. The average single detached home is 1.5 mil, right? So that's 20 times. That's 1.5 mil over 70,000. And then San Francisco, the difference in San Francisco, for example, home prices are crazy, but you can also get really good salaries there. As Bilal's former employer, Google likes to give out. So we have to do that once a week. So Bilal, let me give you a quote and I'll ask you a direct question. Okay. And Adam brings up a good point in he had many follow-up tweets because the reaction to this tweet was wild and the boomers were big mad in the replies, right? So let me quote Warren Buffett, who obviously is not representative, but he had a very good quote on this. He said, I'm going to give my kids enough to do something, but not enough money to do nothing, right?
Banger.
That's, to me, dude, you're talking
Say
about this guy. Say
that one more time, because we need to reload.
I'm going to give my kids enough money to do something, but not enough money to do nothing. There it is. It's like,
that's great.
You help them, you pay for their education, help them if you can, if they don't
take that stress away, but
take the
not
stress.
So much that you're just lazing around all day.
Exactly. 100%. And I think that's the right perspective to have. And the point from when I'm reading this tweet and the responses is kind of the tension here is when do you give it, right? Because I think a lot of parents, they do want to give, but the question becomes, when should you do it?
Because most will put it in their will and it's after they pass away versus potentially helping earlier on.
Exactly. Bill Perkins, who wrote a great book, Die with Zero. You remember that book? He's basically saying like and you had mentioned this previously before we recorded, is like giving $1 to your children when they're 30 versus giving them 10 when they're 60. I mean, it's not even close, right? The $1 when they're 30. Forget about like just the time value and compounding. Like you said, the de-stressing, it's invaluable. So I'm going to pass it to you and your thoughts on this kind of like the tension that's going on here.
Yeah, I think that the great frame for that, but I would also add, obviously all parents have there's varying levels of what they think and varying levels of how much they do help versus have the ability to help, right? So it just is very diverse. But I think the narrative that, if you go 2010s, there was the BuzzFeed Mashable era of shitting on millennials having avocado toast and buying $5 lattes, right? And if you think of like in the personal finance world, so like Dave Ramsey, have you ever seen Dave Ramsey stuff, by the way, Trung?
I've seen him on social, but I haven't followed him deeply.
Yeah, the summary is he's typical personal finance guy, but his approach is very much like he's kind of shits on people, be like, oh, you're spending too much money, you millennials don't know what it's like to work hard, all this sort of stuff. I'm generalizing here, but there was this idea of you're spending too much money on Instagrammable avocado toast and $4 lattes, and that's the reason you can't afford to buy a house, which is complete bullshit.
So that's Ramsey. So he's a bit of a.
I mean, he's one of those people. I think if you look at the general FIRE movement I'm definitely generalizing here, but the very frugal style, personal finance, Mr. Money Mustache style, if you've ever gone in this world, it's just traditional, like save your money, save best, be frugal, versus saying actually the principle here is only spend the amount that you earn and invest and make sure you're within your means. But the bigger question is what's actually contributing to not being able to afford to buy a house, which we talked about a little bit earlier. The biggest lever of that, if this was a pie chart, like I like to say, 80% of it is just the multiple of your income, right? Plus rising inflation, and all the different opportunities that we've talked about. So that's really what's driving it. It used to be that you could just get a regular job. You could be, like we said, not in a bad way, a teacher, a bus driver. I have friends who their parents were bus drivers and they bought houses, right? Now I know most of my Google friends are earning top 5% of income. Most of them don't have houses.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to say, right? We're just basically saying is like there's jobs across the spectrum, and I think most people can understand like where the pay bands are for these jobs. Previously in the 1990s, you could get a very nice home with 10x appreciation potential on almost any job across that spectrum. Yeah. Right? And obviously a lot of things change just because land use changes when the population gets bigger. And it's almost like this 40-year period, and we mentioned at the top, it's like this asset price appreciation was insane. So
and the lack of supply as well, we've talked about as well. Right. And so I think the question is, now if you're digging into that question of affordability, housing is just one part of it, is maybe the biggest part of it. That's why we talk about it so much. it's also renting. Like renting, as you know, rents have gone up quite significantly. And again, a percentage of your income in a lot of places is really significant. So I think that's where this kind of frustration comes from a lot of our generation. Also, then you add in 2008 crash. Now we've had just COVID, two really massive parts of our kind of 20s, 30s being hit in that regard. And honestly, I feel kind of the worst for like the generation coming up after that, because the ones who are graduating 2020, let's say, you're coming into this crazy world.
COVID.
That is a really difficult.
Into COVID.
Exactly. Where then the prices went crazy high for lots of things. So I do think, I'm not trying to be here like, oh, boo-hoo or us. Like, I feel really lucky personally, like how my career, income, all that stuff has been. But most of it, I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about just the wider perspective of, even in my situation, let's say your parents, they've worked, they've maybe bought some property, they've got their 401k, they've got to a point where they're comfortable. The question is, would they be willing to help earlier if there was kind of more of a narrative around it? And if there wasn't this false narrative of, oh, well, your kids should just do exactly what you did because it's as easy as
hustle,
what you did.
Grind,
hustle,
and like,
grind.
You have to earn everything, right? And dude, we get that. But your point at the very top is there's perception, and I think this is much more prevalent in Asian societies, right? It's like you're trying to uplift, you're trying to level up your kids, right? It's like, dude, think about the you go to East Asia, you go to South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the amount of resources put into children to try to improve their lives is like, it's a priority, right? Whereas there's this kind of atomization in the West of, I was able to do it by myself. Or there's perceptions I was able to do it by myself.
Or what's the story they say? I came to this country with £50 in my pocket. Like my dad said that, and he legit did. And I respect it so much. Imagine doing that now, though. And there are some people doing it, don't get me wrong. They're coming, they're doing Uber, they're doing DoorDash, they're like working their way, they're finding ways to make money. I respect that more than anyone. But
same.
Let's just not pretend it's the same here. It's a very different world we're living in. And so I would say, like, if more people, like, I've actually been watching a lot of Ramit Sethi. We've talked about him probably on the pod before. He's got a new book out about couples and managing money, and he's got a lot of interviews on his podcast with couples. I've been finding it quite interesting diving into that, because what you realize is 90% of people's relationship with money just comes from the stories they heard as a kid.
Oh, really? From the
because
parents?
think about like from your childhood, everyone has irrational things about money. I mean, not just money, everything, but specifically money. How many relationships do you even know each other's incomes, your net worth for each? How many people even know that for themselves? But when you go into these discussions, it's really interesting. People will literally find out on the call that they make $50,000 more as a household for the first time. And they've literally signed up to go on a show. Can you imagine like your general
Wait, hold on a second. Let me walk through this. So you actually do like the show a lot. What is the conceit of the show? Is like
the show is he has couples come on, share their numbers, and then they kind of go through kind of like a coaching call almost around what are the things that they care about, what are the things they want to plan for in the future, what are their numbers like, are they spending below their means, all the kind of principles he's had.
So the commonality you're finding is that the people's perceptions are 90% influenced by, 90% of the couples or people are from the parents.
I think most people carry stories, not just with money, but everything, but specifically as it relates to money, around scarcity mindset a lot of the time. It either manifests in the scarcity mindset or it becomes like you become an avoider. Like if you just think of relationships, I don't know what it's like with you and your wife, but in general, when you've spoken about money, there's normally one person who really wants to look at the money side and one doesn't. Or it's not always the same, but often that's the case.
There's tension. There's tension.
Obviously, there's disparities in how much people make between themselves as well. And then there's the trust and the value. It's like, oh, is the guy paying for stuff or is the girl paying for stuff? Or am I paying on the first date or are we splitting it? You know, there's all these things that come about in different cultures and different societies. Okay, now we've been dating for 6 months. So can we now start splitting stuff? What's the right time to do that? Going to have kids. How do we account for all that? So that's why I've been actually finding it really interesting, because I started realizing even with myself. I'll give one very specific example. In the last few years, I've been feeling like oh my God, like there's just, everything's going up. I get a letter last week. My health insurance from last 3 years went from $650 a month to it's now gone up to $1,000 a month just for me. Right. And it's not even that good.
What?
Yeah, it's insane. I'm going to have to look because I'm like, this is, even if you can afford it, it's just like, it's starting to piss me off, right?
Well, bro, I got a Disney Plus email. They're going up $2 a month and that pissed me off. I can't even imagine.
Bro, QuickBooks for my little small business. I'm like, how are you doubling your prices? Like all of these things just start adding up. And so there's that feeling of, okay, things are going up. I go to grocery store, everything's going up in price. Wages for most people haven't gone up proportionately to all these things. You get your rent renewal or your whatever, your mortgage rate went up because your interest rate wasn't locked in. That feeling is prevalent across society, right? So even just for myself, I've been feeling that for a few years. And then I zoomed out and I was like, okay, look, there's little things that are pissing me off more than they should be. But when I zoom out and I'm actually able to say, wait a minute, this is a ridiculous thing. I'm going out because it's a fun experience to go sit there for half an hour, get to talk to my girlfriend or a friend or whatever. Or a lot of the time, honestly, I do like business meetings. I'm meeting people, we go for a walk, we get coffee. If I got coffee every single day for the rest of the year, it costs X $1,000, whatever it is. And in my head, I was like, I can just, as a percentage of my overall income and net worth, this is nothing, right? Why am I even giving myself this stress over it? But that's what I'm saying. That is an example that I'm sure many people have here of, it's an irrational thought. I should actually be thinking I should be raising my prices for my business. I should be having that tough conversation. I should be putting 20% into my investments versus only 15% or whatever. And those things are going to make a massive impact on my own personal finances. But what it comes from is the stories that you have as a kid. And specifically with me, we grew up fairly poor. We had overdraft every month. And there's that scarcity mindset that I've had of, oh, I need to save where I can. But when I go travel, I'll pay anything I want for stuff, right?
But you know when Bilal's traveling and they're offering him that gum on the street for $10, he's like, yo, I'll take 2 of them.
There we go, exactly. So that's what I'm saying. So, but that's kind of what I found interesting as it relates to this is our relationship with certain things. We'll spend lots on certain things, but we'll just all of a sudden become cheap about one thing because in our heads, we're like, this is not good value. And so that's why... You know, I know it's not exactly what you talked about originally, but it's this idea of our relationship with money and how we can kind of fix some of those things.
Let me actually tie it back though, because there's that thing. If the full scarcity mindset gets in the way of I need to level up, right? Because leveling someone up is
mindset,
exactly. It's like this is a leveling up investment, and I'll be very honest. Like for me, there's no question. It's like. Every step of the way, I'm thinking with my kid, I'm like, I'm going to try to level him up. Again, it's the Buffett idea. It's like not for him to do nothing. It's like I see an opportunity. It's going to cost money to something he's ambitious about, something he wants to pursue. Costs a little bit of cheddar. Going to try to level up. That's the mindset. And I think Adam kind of hit it because I read a lot of replies, and you touched on it briefly about your father, but like the reply and your parents. The reply was like, you know, I have to work. Well, why am I gonna pass it on to this guy? And like, but man, that's just like, it's like you said, it's the wrong mindset. And again, that might have been passed down from their parents, right? The boomer parents, maybe the silent generation, because they came up during the Great Depression. They're passing that down. But
that's the thing. It's always passed on, right? It's the other phrases you'll hear a lot of. Trung, you may have, whether you or your family or your friends. It's like money doesn't grow on trees. We don't have enough of that. Or maybe your parents weren't like that. Or they
kind of were, yeah.
Yeah, and then you're Asian as well. So I'm making some assumptions like me as well, right? And someone sent me that Russell Peters Indian trying to do business with a Chinese person video the other day. I forgot how good it is. Oh my god,
dude, classic. That was peak Russell Peters.
That was peak, 2000s when he was the biggest comedian.
If people don't know that skit, is go Google it and what was it? Was it the Chinese buyer and the Indian seller, the other way around?
Yeah, it was like a Chinese guy selling something to an Indian guy who's trying to get a discount.
The whole point is that it's an immovable force versus like that it's an unstoppable force versus an immovable object, and
I will say the context is back then like people weren't doing that sort of comedy. It was very unique in what he did, but that was like a passing around on Bluetooth video, by the way, on my Nokia phone. I remember early smartphone, but anyway, but that's what I'm saying, like these ideas are what your parents passed down a lot of the time. And so some people hear that and then they kind of go the opposite direction and they say, oh, actually, we were kind of had this scarcity mindset. I'm going to go make a better life for myself, whatever. I think mine has been a combination. I had a bit of that, but then I've started noticing more in my day-to-day life recently. I was like, why am I not like, I've been trying to correct it. So for example, I'm going home to see them. I bought tickets to take them to the play, like the theater in the West End. And I was looking at tickets. Naturally, my head goes to, oh, that's quite a good seat. And it's quite a good value for, that play. But then I was like, no, man, let's just go. Let's get the best seat. Let's get right in the middle. Let's pay a little bit more. I'm not doing this every day. So let's make the most of that. But that is a tiny example of just correcting that kind of money psychology in my own head.
So the summary is, let me summarize everything you just talked about here before we move on to the next question. Summary, level up your kids in their 30s if you can, number one.
Yeah.
Summary number two, it sounds like you're giving a content recommendation to watch Ramit's show.
I think it does a decent job. It's a bit repetitive, but I've been finding it interesting.
Well, so is House Hunters, and there's no stopping.
Yeah. All right, so I know we went on tangent there, but I think it was a good discussion on how we repair our money psychology. Trung, let's get on to the next question from Jordan Kalman. Sorry, Jordan, if I said your surname wrong. This was the most Threadboy question, so I got to go with it, but let's do it. What are your favorite thinking models for navigating life? Trung, anything coming to mind? While you were talking before, I was brainstorming some.
Repeat again.
What are your favorite thinking models for navigating life? And I will say, thinking models is just the way you think about the world. Are there certain, we use the phrase on Threadboy Twitter, mental models, right? So that's the same thing I think he's basically saying. So ways you frame things in the world that help you think through things. I can give a few examples that I wrote down here.
Yeah, hit it. Go first.
Well, the first one is, and this is very Mungerism, but I think them in isolation is not, any idea on its own is not necessarily that helpful. And his whole thing, when you read his book, is all about multidisciplinary approach and bringing different
mental models, having many mental models.
100%, yeah. But I wrote a few that I think.
Wait, hold on a second. Hold on, Bilal. Before you go in, let me confirm here. So your answer to what is your favorite mental model to use was the most meta answer. You have to have a mental models of different mental models.
There we go. Well, you have to create a map of them. No, but also I do think it gets a little overdone. Like people love writing these threads of all this stuff. But the truth is, when I was writing these out for myself, I was like, I actually do use this naturally in my head because you've thought about it. Like, for example, we talked about in the pod before, 80-20 Pareto's law. I do that every day. Like, whenever I'm looking at I literally look at my calendar and I'm like, I don't need to do this right now. I need to get rid of that. I need to focus on this. Or when I'm, I've like unlimited things to do I could be doing on my business. What are the things that's going to bring the most impact? So there are things like that we don't have to call it a mental model. It's just about like, this is how I'm going to figure out.
That's like a one thing a day, which I will throw. I was going to answer something along those lines. Is like, you have this to-do list with a million things, but I can't believe I'm saying it because we have to at this point. A good mental model is if you can just do that one thing every single day, whatever, pick one thing.
The biggest thing.
Do it every single day. And here's the word. Jack Butcher loves it. The compounding effect. That this is pointless. That is a very useful way actually to go about your life. It's just like, if you look at the totality of what needs to be accomplished, it's going to be extremely intimidating. But just one day, what is that thing you do? Can you do it every single day? Or whatever, 300 days of the year. Can you do that? I think that's a very good way of approaching things instead of like, oh man, this project that I have is just impossible. I can't even think about it. It's like, no, what is that one thing you need to do that day? Can you do that thing, whatever you choose, every single day?
Yeah. What's that for you, writing for a certain period of time, I take it?
Yeah, it's just like, exactly. It's like 3 to 4 hours for time for deep work.
And can I get everything out of my schedule that is blocking this for me to
exactly. And just do that. And, some days it'll be complete shit. You'll accomplish nothing. But the whole point is carving that out.
Any others that come to mind for you?
In terms of like the one thing a day or in general?
No, beyond the other things that you might use in your actual day-to-day thinking.
I think especially because how
stuff with your kids, your family.
How online I am, just like infinitely online. The spotlight effect, which we've talked about in previous episodes, but just addressing it directly is like.
What's that? What does that mean again?
It's just the idea of like it's similar to the main character effect. Is like obviously you're in your head 16 hours a day, so you think like somebody says something, it's about you, or you get an email, you think it's all. It's like the reality is that however much you're thinking about yourself is probably in order of 1,000 times more than what anybody else is thinking. And the key here being is like to yourself, you're in the spotlight, but the reality is that no one else, they're living in their own brains, they're in their own spotlight, they actually don't care. Nobody really cares about you. It's like, that's a major unlock because you can stop ruminating and thinking, oh, this person said X, this person did Y. Did I offend them? Am I thinking X, Y, Z? It's like, honestly, it's pretty narcissistic to think that they care. They don't. It's like they got their own problems, right? It's like
they're thinking
these
about
people have
stuff.
their own issues, and they might think about you for 20 seconds if you say something to offend them, or you say something they didn't like, and then they say something back. Like they literally will stop thinking about you. That's it. It's like stop. Don't even waste another cycle on it. You know, I had a really good. I wrote something about Virgil Abloh, rest in peace. Former menswear lead at Louis Vuitton, founder of Off-White, Kanye West creative director. I read something. I saw a tweet that somebody put of an interview he had, and he was asked, "How should minorities think about in the industry? Should they, do they take? How do you address if somebody slights you?" And he had such a great response. I mean, this is a guy that reached the top of the fashion industry as a Guyanese American, right? He goes, I honestly don't have time to think about that because he said, and this is a guy who died at 41, he goes, there's so little time that you have on this earth. It's like if you're wasting a cycle thinking about what these people are thinking about, he's like, you're not going to be able to accomplish anything. And that's kind of some of the spotlight effect is like, you have X amount of time, is don't waste it thinking what other people are thinking because they just don't give a shit. They literally don't care about you.
Yeah, I love and that's a really good one. I've got a couple more here, Trung. I'll just list them out real quick. This actually, a lot of mine are around like decision making because I think it's like trying to stop overthink, simplify, and move quickly with. It's not even just work stuff; it's like personal stuff.
Well, as representative of Creator Lab podcast, actually, you have so many great pods with decision makers in general.
Yeah, and because if you think of what life really is, it's a combination of waking up, doing a lot of the same things over and over again, but you're making hundreds of decisions every day.
But that's why the one thing a day is so important. Right? You boil it down to the handful of things you can do. So rattle off a couple more.
And also, so the one I also use very regularly is the facts versus stories. Have we talked about this before?
No.
So often you will have a thought about something. You often have anxiety about something happening in the future, or you're trying to figure out why did this go wrong? Or why did so-and-so say this to me? And then you create all these stories around, well, they said it because I'm not good at this, or they don't like me for this reason, or X. It's the same thing you were just mentioning there. You start overthinking. Everyone does it. And I often will literally go and write out, like, from this scenario, what are the things I actually know? What are the facts? And in another column, I write out, well, what are all the things I've made up in my head? And we all do it all the time.
Wait, how often do you do this?
I mean, often I do it in my head all the time. Like every week, there's occasions where I do it with my girlfriend all the time. We're talking about something, and I'll be like, wait a minute, let's kind of separate these two different things. What's actually real, and what are the things we're kind of assuming and making up, essentially. And so if there's assumptions there, we need to
check yourself. You're checking yourself.
Yeah, and often it takes away the anxiety of something that's happening. So it obviously depends on the scenario you're talking about. Happens at work all the time when you're working in teams and you're like, well, so-and-so gave me feedback on my presentation. It's because last time they did this one thing and last time I didn't get the promotion I was supposed to. And actually now I'm not going to be in the lead to get my promotion. Like all the things you start worrying about in regular life. But the truth is most of the time, they're not even thinking that. You're just kind of making stuff up all the time. The other one I
Spotlight
heard,
effect, bro.
Yeah, exactly. The other one that I think is really good is as it relates to making decisions specifically. This I've applied a lot this year in personal life around one-way doors and two-way doors. Have you heard of this one, or we talk about it?
Oh, Jeff Bezos, think
Jeff
boy.
Bezos one.
Yeah,
and so they use it at Amazon for business-related stuff, but also in personal life, I actually think it happens way more often. So the idea is you can overthink a decision all the time. And there are some decisions that you actually really need to take your time, do all the research, figure it out, talk to lots of people, and then decide, okay, we're going in this direction. And those are what are called one-way doors.
It's a one-way door. It's like having a kid is a one-way door.
That's it. You're not coming back. Exactly.
Yeah,
so you really need to know, by the time I have a kid, I've thought it through. You don't want to do that on a whim, right? You're deciding, once I go through this door, I'm not coming back. I need to take on this responsibility, whatever that means. Am I in a safe and secure relationship? Is the person I'm with, the person who I trust is going to be able to look after them with me, etc. But most decisions aren't that. Most of them are two-way decisions, two-way doors, where you can easily try something out. And if it doesn't work, you can come back, right? So you're like, I want to start playing a new sport. Okay, I've got a bad shoulder right now, but let me go try it out. If it starts aching, I'm just going to come home that day. It's not that. Stop overthinking. Can I go and play pickleball this weekend? Like,
because let's be explicit. What's the second door there? The second door is you coming back.
Just coming back home. I'm buying a burrito. You know what I mean? I'm happy. You know, it's completely fine.
Hold on. You know, I want to walk through this example because it kills me. This is definitely happening.
I didn't exercise. I bought a burrito on the way home.
But this is literally happens like where you have like a tweak in your back or like a hamstring. You're like, I'm gonna go for a run. Yeah, and then you get down like 50 meters.
And you're like, you know what? I'm calling it. Pizza.
And on the way back, you literally pass a 7-Eleven. You're like, screw it. Like, I'm getting this.
Let's lean in. Yeah. Well, this actually brings up another. So you kind of get the idea. The other one, I actually talked to what's in it, Annie Duke. She brought this up.
Yeah, that's what her part. Shout out. Let me pump Bilal's podcast here. Go listen to his Creator Lab episode, Annie Duke.
Let me just write. Sunk cost fallacy. I'm actually just going to read this out because.
Hold on. Can I talk to her? Is this the railroad, the high speed rail in California? Is this the one you're referring to? Because if it's not,
that was the example. Yeah. But
to give people
you might remember it better than I do.
Yeah, I'll walk through it actually. So, because this is a really good. This is about Annie Duke. She's a former poker player, became an investor. Decision making clearly from poker playing. That's what the key is. She had this whole book called Quit, and so actually I'll shout out Adam Singer again, friend of the pod. I wrote an article, I think at this point, 18 months ago, about the idea of persistence and compounding. It's like you go in something and, you have some obstacles, you got to push through it. But then Adam actually replied to him and things like, actually, like quitting is a skill too. And then he wrote that to me and I started Googling quitting as a skill and like Annie Duke's book actually came up. And then Bilal was like, well, I actually interviewed her. So I listened to the interview, read the book. And the point she's making is, no, actually you should get good at quitting. And because some things are worth quitting because it's an opportunity cost, right? An example she gave is if the high-speed rail project in California, it costs us something like $40 billion now for less than 5 kilometers of track. But the point is, she's like, that should have been something they quit. But what Bilal had alluded to was they made a mistake. And the decision and planning they made the mistake on is they put such a stake in the ground that it's made it harder to quit. And what that was they basically built a very large section of the track and had invested so much money. It is a sunk cost fallacy in a way, but there's more to it than that. It's the idea of you can make decisions that make it extremely hard to quit. And in some ways, that's
you're making it what? You're digging a hole. You're continuing to invest.
It's the burn the boats mentality, though, right? It's like maybe you want that. Maybe you want to burn the boats where you can't turn back. But
can I give one more example? Because personal life, right? Well, let's say the pod, because people, you're buying a shit coin and you keep buying it, even us going, you're like, actually, well, I've already sunk in $1,000 for this. Now I might as well just write it out. I'm going to put 2 more grand in, and you keep going. That's obviously just a random joke example, but it actually happens a lot in relationships, right? That's another personal example where you dating someone for 6 months, a year, or you get to a certain point, maybe it's even 3-4 years, and you're like, well, I've already put in all this effort, I've already met the family and all this stuff, but you know deep down something's not right, but you just stick to it. That happens all the time to people, and 20 years later they eventually may cut it off. And so that's the thing, it's the idea of try to become aware of when you're just doing something because you've just been doing it already, and you're like, I've already put money in and I need to just keep doing it, or I've already put effort in and I need to just make the most of that. And versus just saying, actually, it's okay that it didn't work. Now I'm just going to cut my losses.
Opportunity cost. That's it, right? That's the Annie Duke idea of like, you're putting your stake in the ground. Be very careful when you do that, because it can make it extremely hard to, like you said, quit if there's a better, like actually truly a better opportunity. And no, that's a great decision-making example.
So I think for the sake of time, we can move on. But unless you had any others, I think that was a good question there from Jordan. Thanks, Jordan, for submitting that. Next question is, here we go. So actually, there's a couple of questions we got on basically the future of work with AI. I wanted to bring up this tweet. Did you see this super viral tweet from a teacher or an ex-teacher? I'll just read it out here instead of sharing my screen. So it's only short. So Dr. Amy Clucky said, I'm no longer a teacher. I'm just a human plagiarism detector. I used to spend my grading time giving comments for improving writing skills. Now most of that time is just checking to see if a student wrote their own paper. What a waste of a life. Right. And so it kind of blew up because obviously people are in the comments being like, oh, well, this is the future of people going to be using these tools, so you could better get used to it. Or like maybe they should be learning something else. And then there's other people who are on the flip side saying like, no, they shouldn't be able to do this, whatever. So a typical viral thing on the internet, 2 people on opposing sides fighting each other. The reason I bring that up is just because the other 2 questions, I'll just read them out. One was from Ethan Lee Tyson, who said, what do you want to work most on in the next 5 years that isn't currently a priority? And then a related question from VM said, with your knowledge of what's going on in the industry so far, what kind of jobs do you see there will be in the next 3 to 4 years? What kind of careers will you say that your children should be doing? Do you worry about that for your children?
Okay, let's go one by one. What's the? Let's knock off. What's the very first one?
So I guess the question is, in the next 5 years, what are the types of jobs that we should be thinking about? And the second part is for 10, 20 years, your kids. So maybe we separate those 2.
I would, we talked about this briefly last week with Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA. And again, with the caveat being, he's very persuasive in talking about things that will pump his own bucks, right? But that's not his mentality. But obviously he's going to talk very bullish about the AI industry, because that's NVIDIA is the 800 billion, the 3 trillion pound gorilla in that room, right? I would say getting really good at using AI tools.
Using the tools, exactly.
Yeah, I think these will, and it relates to something that we have had on a previous AMA question that we haven't answered yet, but it's like the reality of a one-person billion-dollar company, which came from a Sam Altman tweet, co-founder of OpenAI, obviously, and the CEO of OpenAI. He said there will be a future where there'll be a one-person billion-dollar company, and it will be intermediated by having what Jensen Huang calls your CEO of your own AI agents. And the way he described it is like, what is my job? He has 60 direct reports, and he's like, my job is to outline problems, delegate to the right person, and then have them bring it back to me, and then I keep moving the ball forward. And that's how he perceives as these agents, AI, these models improve. And if you see with like the O1 model, which is the OpenAI, they call it the reasoning model, where you kind of give it a problem and it takes a lot longer to think through it. It goes through steps. I'm of the school where that will only get better. And, shout out to Google. We got to mention it. At this point, 2 weeks ago, DeepMind won a freaking Nobel for chemistry. And Demis Hassabis, right? It's like, and like that's the unlock. there's the AI slop version that we joke about on this pod, but the other side of the AI is like, trying to little AI, like trying to little internet. You're gonna get the full spectrum of things, right? All right. So regarding the next 5 years, I think the Jensen Huang vision of being really good with AI agents will be a very powerful and highly leveraged move. I mean, just an example is like people being able to use Copilot well, right? The coding assistant from Microsoft and GitHub. So there's going to be that for everything. That's not a new thing that's being said, but that is dependent on these reasoning models getting better. So some people are saying, there's critics of that saying they won't happen. I'm betting that it will improve. 5 years is a long time. The other thing, and this is very NIA and funny that we'd say this, and Jack has self-criticized us in the sense of like a lot of our answers always going back to like brand building. It's like build yourself personality. Because Jack's created Visualize Value, right? That was his brand around his identity and built a business around it. But as AI, this is twofold. As AI becomes more prevalent, people actually do want the human touch. That is the honest truth. And
I was gonna say that. Yeah,
it means like
touch. It's the opposite of what is supply and demand. There's unlimited supply of something, and then there's like a counter trend.
If there's unlimited AI slop, and you can tell, man, like you can tell AI text, you just know. You're beginning to get a sense of it, right? And even we talked about Notebook LM, that podcast maker, which we're very impressed with from Google, where you just upload X amount of text, like 20 PDFs.
Yeah, it creates a podcast for you.
And you literally just click audio overview, and it creates a 10-minute podcast between a female and male host that sounds supernatural. There are still things, right? If you listen, it's not fully there yet. And the joke that we made about that was like, I still think the Bill Burr 90-minute monologue of his show is like that's not even close for them to nail that yet.
You said, I think that's the last thing to
go. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like to answer the question in 5 years, I think to extrapolate what I meant by that is, the human quirks is like still the piece that I do not think AI will figure and solve for, because by definition, they're doing kind of the median outcome, the middle result, right? And certainly there'll be models that will go to the extremes. But there's just some shit that like you and I could talk about that it'll just not be able to come up with, and the cadence, the way we talk about the speed, having and catching the human emotions, like seeing like Bilal roll his eyes when I say something like a historical number, and Bilal like, oh, here comes fun fact fan, right? That whole thing. So I think like building that and then leveraging this on the back end with so much cognitive help. And to your point about that tweet, Bilal, you said that teacher, which is very powerful, right? She's an AI plagiarism detector, essentially. Cal Newport, Deep Work, author of Deep Work, is a professor, a computer science professor, really famous writer for New Yorker. We've talked about him before, but he had this article actually about how does ChatGPT write? And he wanted to address this exact question. Is ChatGPT just a plagiarism machine? That's what he wanted to write. And his finding from interviewing students and teachers, he didn't agree with that assessment. He said something along the lines of, the way I see it being done is it is an unlock for writing. It is an intellectual partner to get the ball rolling, to think. Because writing is cognitively very difficult. And I'll use, so I'll tell you how I use AI, is I use it to bounce ideas, and like I'll feed it text I write, and then I want it to just tear it apart and give me different perspectives on it. I'll never take the AI text because it's so mid, right? It really is mid.
Yeah.
And I have never taken it, but it is a cognitive unlock, and that's what I say is like build the personal human side, combine it with this CEO agentic Jensen Huang model. So that's what I say next 5 years with AI specifically.
That's a great answer. I wouldn't add too much more. I agree with what you said about the Bill Burr long monologue being the last part, and just zooming out. Not necessarily I agree with the whole long thing, but it's more the wit, the smart humor. Like if you ask it to be funny, it's not funny. Like I've been playing around with it and be like, hey, tell a joke about this or blah, blah, blah. And it's just, it sounds like someone who doesn't know how to tell jokes, right? And it's like, I've added this in to make it funny because this is a misdirection. It's like, no, this isn't working. Now, maybe in the future, if you fed it specifically a comedy specific use case, like here's Chris Rock, Bill Burr, and all these comedians, here's a bunch of writing, here's a bunch of funny podcasts, and train it on that, maybe it can do a better job of that, who knows? But at the moment, I still think that's the human touch that you're saying, that there is a little bit difficult to replicate still. And so the human touch is the kind of umbrella term, but that can be everything from the humor. But also, like you said, there's still, like, the ability to sell is a very generic, broad term. But whether that is literally face-to-face selling or selling on a web page, the way that you are able to do that through writing copy and stuff like that. Now, like, don't be wrong, AI can write pretty good copy, actually. For marketing,
and it's actually quite persuasive.
Pretty persuasive, exactly. Now, for that, makes sense. But I'm saying the ability to sell is not just learning sales skills. It is understanding what people want and what people care about, their motivations, and that is a whole field which you can use the tools to help you. But I think there's always going to be room for that, because your ability to sell is in everything. It's like if you're a founder of a company, you're selling to investors, or you're selling to your initial customers, and for all your customers, you're selling to employees. Like, that ability is just convincing people is probably a better phrase, right? And so maybe AI can help you with that, but I do think that's the human touch that you kind
there's
of
always there's alpha skill. There's always the premium for humans. And there's a very good example I'd put. Let me put one chart on this. Is we're getting close to wrapping up, but here's a image I think that kind of frames this well. So here is, you remember when they went a couple years ago and made synthetic diamonds?
Yeah.
Man-made diamonds
lab-grown,
versus lab-grown, right? So the whole idea is like a diamond is compressed carbon, thousands of years to make these true diamonds. You can do that in a lab now. But here's this chart. Look at the price of a lab-grown diamond versus a natural diamond. People care about the natural, the organic one. They're both.
Yeah, people are still paying the premium at the moment.
Yeah,
you're saying.
For the story, for the history, and they're paying quite a premium. It's 5x, and I think that is exactly what's going to happen with AI-related kind of creative outputs.
Yeah, that's a great frame for that. Yeah, I really like that. The last part, should we just answer his last part of the question, or do you need to run? It was same question. The last part of the question was, he was talking about politicians, and actually, I guess we answered the stuff about children, because this will be still relevant for them in the future. The last part of his question, this is VM. He said, "Isn't it funny that so many industrial revolutions have come and gone, yet the job of politicians has always stayed relatively secure? As in, we have rarely, if ever, heard of Parliament going from 400 to 300 members because AI made life easier, etc., etc." So I guess the question there is like, what? Yeah, I don't know if there was a question there. It was more just a note on role of politicians. Like, what is the point of?
Well, there's a human premium, right? Is like we're still
decision
not
making
for an Optimus robot, which we talked about last week. But I didn't answer the kids thing. I will answer for my kid. It's
go for it.
Physical, really prioritizing physical world stuff. For example, for toys, he's obsessed with Lego, loves drawing. Listen, drawing, AI can do that instantly, but you still need to learn for yourself that connection with the brain, right? And I think in the built world is where, again, whatever ultimately he's interested in, but I'm doing my nudges, and a lot of it is in the direction of this built world stuff, and like being able to be in situations where the human premium still exists, which might even be something like public speaking or in-person interactions, right? Is like that mentally, you work that through and you think what's possible. And it's like, so like 10 years ago, it was like, oh, everybody's got to be a coder. It's like, I don't necessarily know if that's what I'd put.
That's an interesting one too,
right?
Yeah.
It's like, I think architecture might be a lot safer, being able to interact with the built environment. But ultimately...
Well, actually, Trung, let's talk about that one really quickly, because it is very coding real quick. Because we've seen the Indeed jobs drop in technical roles, right? It was an engineer role. It showed a decrease in number of job postings. Now, a lot of that was also the market. It was a tech market where high interest rates resulted in lots of job losses for the tech sector specifically. And so I do think that visual, I don't know, Rafa, if it's easy to find that one, but there was essentially an axis which showed number of job postings for engineers decreased significantly over the last few years. But I do actually think, like, if you speak to people who are starting companies and hiring engineers, there is an expectation that what could be done previously by 2 engineers should be done by 1 or something like that. Like, the tools are there to supercharge you and your creative process. And 100%, I've played around with the coding tools myself, and I'm like, man, this is insane levels of, it's just taking all the stuff that is already out there on the internet and assembling it there for you. Now, you still need to know the language. If you're actually creating something new and novel, you still need to know the technical infrastructure. But the actual act of typing in for X amount of time is 100% being reduced when you look at the tools that are coming out there, like Copilot and what's the Cursor is something a lot of people are using nowadays.
Replit's got
Replit's got their thing as well, really interesting. So I still think that I actually wrote that here because if you asked me this 5 years ago, I would have said coding would be a great tool or a great skill to learn. Now I changed that to creating. That doesn't necessarily mean coding. It means sometimes you're using code to create stuff, but sometimes you're like, I'm just creating a blog. I'm creating a newsletter like you have. You're creating a podcast, whatever it is. The ability to take something and actually make something yourself, I don't think that's ever going away. That's even more, and not just creating anything, creating stuff that people want and learning that process and being able to experiment to do that, I think you're always going to need to know that as well. All right, anything else, Trung, or should we wrap it there?
Yeah, were there any other hanging questions? But I think that was pretty solid.
That was it. I mean, the last one was this wild question from Jordan as well about the dark part of our personas. Do you remember this question in Telegram?
I don't know if we're going to have time for that one. That might be a 5-hour one. But let's wrap it, dude. Peace.
Let's wrap it in.
Awesome.
But that was great. I hope you guys enjoyed that. We'll see you next week. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Peace.